Back when I was in college, I used to work nights at my uncle's motel just outside of Baton Rouge. It was a pretty sweet gig for the most part. I was already a total night owl during the summers. So instead of staying home with my parents getting on their nerves and being bored stiff during the midnight hours, I got to watch movies, read comic books, order takeout, and get paid for the whole thing. I remember those times with a lot of nostalgia, to be honest, but every so often, I think about this one night where I happened across one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen. It might even be the creepiest thing I'd ever even heard of to me because of what it might have entailed and many unanswered questions that left me with. It started with the motel's fire alarm going off. The fire alarm automatically alerted the fire department. So officially speaking, all they had to do was make sure all the guests evacuated properly. But then unofficially, with it being my uncle's only form of livelihood, and him being terrible at making his insurance payments, it was always an unwritten rule that whoever was on duty would have to try their darndest to put the fire out before the whole friggin' place burned down. So that's what I did. Once I saw smoke billowing out of one of the rooms, I ran up there with my fire extinguisher kicked in the door, and was relieved when I saw that the fire was basically a small one in the center of the room. I just let rip on that thing with my extinguisher, then within a couple of seconds, the fire was out, then I'd saved the day. Obviously, I didn't pay much attention to what else was going on in the room. And the fact that there was no one in it didn't faze me, because I figured they evacuated like everyone else. My uncle had already been alerted of the fire, and he's been ringing the motel's phone like crazy. And boy, did I feel like a hero telling him that I basically saved his entire income by putting the fire out before it could spread. He then asked me to check on the actual damage before the fire department showed, which was still going to be a while, hence why he'd always asked me to be Johnny on the spot with an extinguisher if there was ever a fire. So I do as I'm told, heading back up to the room while reassuring the parking lot's congregation of guests that everything's going to be fine. And then I put the fire out. When I get back to the room, do I realize that the fire had been set in one of the small metal trash cans that was in each person's room. Someone had obviously filled the thing with God knows what, placed it in the center of the room, then just set the thing on fire before bailing out of the room. Then read us, I'm thinking, why would someone do that? I realized someone had arranged a bunch of stuff around the room. They were close, kid close. And interspersed among them were a bunch of what looked like kids' drawings. Then when I checked down with the drawings I realized it wasn't just the fire department that should be on their way. It was the cops too. The drawings were of kids in cages or sad crying kids with big angry looking grown-ups towering over them. Then another was what seemed to be one kid crying over a dead kid while the grown-up figures laughed. Seriously. They were so horrific that despite the heat and smoke still circulating in the room, I felt a little chill go down my spine. I immediately went to call the cops, then check who was booked into the room and, more importantly, if any kids were booked in there, too. That was just one guy's name in there. Cameron Odell. So what was one lone guy doing with so many kids' clothes? The drawings were horrifying, but it wasn't out of the question that an adult could have been responsible for them. The clothes though, that was a different story. I mean, after the fire department arrived, and they were checking the room over to confirm it was safe for the other guests to head back to their rooms, I asked the group of guests in the parking lot if there was a Cameron Odell among them. No one spoke up a raised hand, and no one by the name or any other name booked another room after everything died down. So I'm guessing whoever was calling themselves by that name had gotten out of there following the fire. The cops showed up a short while after the fire department didn't. I showed them all the clothes and drawings I'd found along with the booking under the Odell name. Officially, their investigation would involve looking for potential arson, but the cops told me that they'd be looking into the clothes and drawings to have they ever caught the guy who tried to set the room on fire. And that was pretty much the last I heard of it. For the first few weeks that followed, I kept asking my uncle if they'd caught the guy who had set the room on fire. Each time the answer was the same. No. I tried telling him about the kids' clothes and the pictures, But all he seemed to care about was that the damage to the room was minimal. Besides, I was his hero, having put the fire out now. So whenever the subject came up, it was all just backslaps, and that's my boy kind of talk. It was really hard to get the details. Like I said earlier, what I'm mostly left with here are unanswered questions and a lot of half-baked theories of what that guy was trying to do. But there's one in particular that really sits with me. If the guy had a bunch of kids locked up somewhere, if it was him that was trafficking children and he was trying to dispose of the evidence or something, he definitely went about it in a really dumb way. But then, what if he was one of the kids that had been abused? And he was trying to draw attention to it some way? What if he tried to get people to listen to him time and time again? Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here with that one. And it brings up way more questions than answers. But I really don't know what else to make of such a creepy situation. I just feel like there's some deep dark backstory to the whole thing. But for the time being, I don't know what that is. Maybe in the years to come, if the truth comes out, I'll find out just what a crucial incident motel fire was. And maybe not. Maybe it'll just remain a mystery. Just like so many other things in life. I apologize in advance for not being the best storyteller. But this is definitely a true story. It's also not my story as much as my mom's, who used to work at a motel in California back in the 80s. Anyways, one day, a guy shows up to book a room. And I'm just going to refer to this guy as the guest, since I don't actually know his name. My mom got assigned to clean his room on the daily, but as time went by, she noticed that he always had the "Do Not Disturb" sign up on his room. So even like a weekend to this day, she never once had a chance to clean his room. This didn't bother the cleaning staff too much. Because the way my mom tells it, the guy was always super nice and friendly whenever he passed reception or bumped into any of the cleaning staff. I was apologizing and telling them that he just clean up after himself. So if I saved them some work, they weren't exactly going to complain about it. Anyways, there came a point where the guy wasn't seen for a few days, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign wasn't on the door anymore. So everyone figured that he just checked out and they'd be able to clean the room again. So given that my mom had been assigned to the room like a month before, it came down to her to head over to clean it. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure out what it was, but she continued to survey the room, which, contrary to the guests' previous assurances, was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a party, even though everyone was pretty sure that no one else seemed to have ever gone into the room besides the guest. Anyways, my mom was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. Then as she followed the smell, she could tell it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a wet-looking cardboard box on the ground. And the mom said the smell got way more intense, so she could tell it was coming from there. She said she had a strong suspicion that the guests had been using it to go to the bathroom in. So the last thing she wanted to do was look inside. Instead, she puts on some gloves and covers up her mouth and nose, and picks the thing up to throw it into the trash. That's when she felt how heavy it was, like way heavier than if there was just some feces inside it or something. It was only when one or the other cleaning lady smelled the same smell that they straight up said somebody called the cops. Apparently, a few years before, the same cleaning lady had found a dead body in a room as someone had a heart attack with a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, and took almost 2 weeks before they finally went to investigate. She said it was like the exact same kind of rotting smell. Definitely not anything else from the human body. So they called the cops so they could come take a look at it. And the cops showed up, cut open the box with everyone watch, and then the officer just looked up to his partner with this numb expression, saying, "Call the coroner. We're gonna for one night." Someone had to explain to my mom that the number was police code for dead body. Only it wasn't like a whole body in there. Now much was obvious because the box was too small. It turned out to be just a decapitated head. I don't really know many more details than that. This is almost 40 years ago now, and I couldn't find any internet archive stuff before I wrote this up. But my mom said that there was talk of the head belonging to a call girl who had gone missing a few weeks before they gave all the guys' info to the cops. But apparently that didn't help. The credit card was stolen and the guy had used the name on that card. Imagine being that person whose credit card got stolen though. One day you think you've lost it or something, and then the next the cops show up accusing you of having murdered a girl. Mom stayed working at the motel for maybe like a year afterward, and she only quit when she met my dad and moved into his place up in Vallejo. Let's start, we always kept me from ever wanting to work in a hotel or motel or anything like that. And no matter how desperate for money I get, I think I'd have to be very, very desperate to work anywhere. You might see the darker side of human nature. I used to work at a motel that everyone said was haunted. I must have been there for maybe 6 or 7 months. And I hadn't seen anything of the sort. Granted, I don't believe in any of that kind of stuff. So it's not like I was out there with my spooky meter. But one night, I had a little run-in with someone that had me questioning my stance on the supernatural altogether. So at this particular motel, we had what was basically an on-site diner that was just across from the rooms, and everything is single story. One afternoon, we were expecting 2 elderly sisters to check in for a few nights. These 2 sisters just so happened to be friends of the owners and fairly regular guests who came to stay on the owner's dime, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Only. I hadn't met them yet, so I had no idea what they looked like or anything. It was way past dark when they arrived. So while they're being greeted by the owner and their baggage is being unloaded by some of the other staff, I get the nod to head up to their room with a bottle of complimentary wine. So I head to the bar in the on-site diner, grab a bottle of our best wine, 2 glasses and a tray, then head out of the back door of the diner and around to the back of the motel. This is a pretty crucial part of the story. As I had been told, the wine had to be a surprise. They'd never have accepted it otherwise, and the owner wanted a little showmanship for his friends, or more accurately, to make it look like he bothered to put some effort into it prior to their arrival. Either way, it meant that I didn't see the old ladies arrive. Otherwise, the story basically would never have happened. There's basically no one else around. And right after I put the wine into the motel room, I head out intending on scurrying away from the room so that the ladies don't catch me having planted their little gift. Only the opposite way I was due to head, I noticed one of the hallway lights was flickering. I swear to God it was seriously like something out of a horror movie, because I turned to look, and underneath the flickering light, wearing a long flowing dress, is a headless figure. At this point, it's important to note something about this whole dumb story about the ghost haunting the motel. Legend has it that it was a young woman whose body had gone undiscovered for so long that she'd brought it to the point where her neck basically tore apart from the rot and the strain. Therefore, it was a headless ghost that was haunting the motel. I know that's about the lamest ghost story you've ever heard of, right? But then imagine being me seeing that headless figure standing under the flickering light. And you can imagine why my heart went from 0 to 60. As I looked at something that I had absolutely zero explanation for. I think I got so loud and so much that my lungs felt like they were about to burst. And that caused the figure in front of me to turn around. Okay, it wasn't a ghost. Like I said, there's no such thing as ghosts or spirits or anything of that nature. But there is such a thing as osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a condition that severely weakens the bones of people who suffer with it. And in older folks, it can mean that they end up with some pretty painful hunching postures. Or in this old lady's case, bones so weak that she could barely support her own head. This meant that from behind it basically looked like this poor lady had no head at all. Anyway, she turns around, gives me this look as if she'd horribly been offended by my terrified gasp, and I'm forced to explain it away like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. You start with me." She just frowns, points up at the light, and says something snarky, like better get that fixed, young man, then waddles off along the corridor. I felt like a total idiot. I seriously thought that I was looking at the very same ghost whose existence had been denied for months on end. I can't even lie. It was one of the scariest and creepiest moments I think I've ever experienced. But back when I was in college down in Florida, I used to work a part-time job at this pretty upscale motel. The motel had this pretty nice pool, and this one time, after a series of pretty gnarly rainstorms, I was tasked with cleaning it. This was really out of the ordinary, as we had an actual specialist that came in when the pool was that bad. But my manager said the guy was up to his eyeballs in jobs and wouldn't be able to come out for a few days. And since it was costing us gas, he told me that if I got it done, he'd let me go early and still pay me my full day wage. Absolutely no-brainer. So I accepted. Then about a half hour into the job, this absolute perfect 10 knockout of a girl around my age comes to the pool in her string bikini and asked how long it would be until the pool was swimmable. I shrugged and told her I didn't know that it was taking a long time as it was, and I'd only scoop like a quarter of the debris out of it. But then, to my luck, she seems contented just chill by the pool on one of those sun loungers until I was finished. I got to where she was coming from there. It was really hot outside, and as pervy as it sounds, I was glad to have some nice scenery to look at while it worked. After a while, she started making a little small talk, and after about a half hour back and forth with her, I pretty much managed to clear the entire shallow end of plant trash. She then asked if she'd be good to dip her legs into the shallows, and I'm like, sure. But then as she does, I noticed a bunch of small dark things swimming out of one of the filters and towards her legs. She hadn't seen them because she was too busy looking at me. But I was seriously like, get your legs out of the pool. I straight up screamed. She looks at me like I'm crazy, as I'd already okayed her putting her legs in to cool down. But when she looks down, she lets out this ear-splitting scream, then basically springs back to her room in tears. If you'd never seen Florida water bugs, now's the time to Google them. And more specifically, to Google how big they can get. Somehow I'd never seen those evil-looking things until right then. And Jesus Christ, they're a sight you're likely not to forget anytime soon. Worst thing is they actually do bite people, which is exactly how they got their nickname of toe biters. They're not dangerous, like they're not poisonous or anything. But they're just about the last thing you want to see swimming towards your legs while you're dipping them in the pool. I'm not great with bugs either. So I noped out of there and told my boss said as much as I appreciated the offer of the day off, I wouldn't be carrying on cleaning the pool that day. He was literally like, you're right, they won't kill you if they bite you. And I straight up told him that I'd rather he fire me than make me clean the pool while those terrifying little things were swimming around in it. Thankfully, he relented and told me to close the pool off by putting the chairs around it like a little forts until the pool guy could come out and completely drain and filter the thing. Apparently, they're pretty easy to kill just by using vinegar or something. But the pool guys still use his protective gloves and stuff because get this, the water bugs can fake being dead then just pop back alive into tricking you into thinking you're safe. That's pure nightmare fuel to me. Florida was fun, and I'm glad I got to experience living there while I was in college. But I sure don't miss all the tropical wildlife down there. And seriously, if I never have to look at another water bug for the rest of my freaking life, it'll still be too soon. Back when I was still getting some money together for college, one of the 2 jobs I worked was as housekeeping for a motel chain. It was on that job that I saw some of the weirdest, creepiest things I've ever put eyes on. And to this day, it remains unexplained. I'm not suggesting what I saw was in any way supernatural, as I'm sure there's a perfectly logical and reasonable explanation for it, especially in our county with a real bad math problems such as this one. But it definitely left me and my co-workers on edge for a few hours afterward. So we're going from room to room knocking on doors, calling out housekeeping in that whole ordeal. Me and my co-workers were leapfrogging each other, so doing every third roomer, so as we worked our way along a corridor. Then as we're working, I just hear one of my co-workers say I do smell, which for those of you that don't know means oh my god in Spanish. Obviously the other two of us come running to see what our coworkers was started about. And I remember arriving in the room and just not being able to see what she was so freaked out about. The place was basically clean apart from one broken window, which was broken right at the top, and the window started about chest height, then went all the way up to the ceiling to let all this nice natural light into the room. Only when I looked right up did I actually see what she was so freaked out about. Leading up to the broken window right on the ceiling were dirty footprints super visible against the pale paint on the ceiling. The two of us that came running were like, how in God's name? But the poor Honduran lady we used to work with basically convinced it was a demon or something that had run along the ceiling before diving out of the window. A much more logical explanation, but granted still kind of crazy, would be that maybe two meth heads had been just throwing each other around on the bed, and that one of them had been actually able to kind of momentarily run along the ceiling for a second before crashing back down. Maybe that's how the window ended up getting broken too. There was definitely no blood or anything to suggest that some kind of crazy accident had occurred. I guess the really creepy thing was seeing how freaked out her coworker was, how she kept clutching the cross around her neck and saying little prayers to herself. She seriously thought that something evil had been in there. And we actually had to talk her down and explain that weirder things happen when people are cramped out of their minds. She just wasn't buying it though. And she always refused to clean that room for the rest of the time I worked there. I cleaned it on many occasions and nothing weird ever happened while I was in there. That throwing each other up in the air thing was honestly the only way I've ever been able to explain it though. I guess math makes you do crazy things. But good God. Running on the ceiling is a whole other level of crazy.